Well, hello everybody. I'm really pleased to be talking with Will Todd, man of music of many parts, and not only the composer of the Mass in Blue, which we, the Waverley Singers, are going to be performing at the Farnham Maltings on the 24th of March, but also Will is going to be leading his ensemble and playing the piano, accompanying us in the concert. So I'm really pleased, Will, to have the opportunity to talk to you. And thanks ever so much for sparing the time.
It's lovely to be with you, Mike. Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to the concert. Um, I'm not too far away. I'm in Guildford these days, so it'll be nice to just pop over to Farnham and make music with you all. It's going to be great.
Well, we're certainly something we're all looking forward to. So, I mean, maybe we could just talk a little bit about how you came to write the Mass in Blue and the kind of music that Mass in Blue is. And I noticed on your website you emphasize that you've always had this kind of shared love of choral music and jazz. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your musical background and those two influences.
Sure. Mass in Blue actually is a very sort of good work for showing where I come from, if you like, because I started my musical journey improvising and experimenting on the piano. And this was before I had any piano lessons. This was apparently as a 2-year-old, 2-stroke 3-year-old. I was into, you know, making sounds on the piano because I mean it is a great instrument for that. It's very easy to get a note out of. So actually, as a kind of toy and something to be playful with, it's a great thing. Um, so I was very interested in that, and I actually learned to play by ear before I ever learnt to read music. And my first reading of music really was in my church choir up in Durham, St Oswald's Church in Durham, and it was there that I sort of developed the reading skills. And of course, I got a platform there in choral music, English choral tradition, if you like, and hymns as well. All sorts of liturgical music. And in Mass in Blue, there's a blend of the jazz blues piano journey that I was on from quite early in my life, and that choral journey, which also happened quite soon after that. And I think there's a really good kind of collision of that in the mass.
And so you obviously you graduated from the church choir. How did you pursue your musical studies? What was the path you were on?
Well, I was mad about music when I was a youngster and a teenager, and I played lots of instruments, and I was in ensembles, and I sang in choirs. I also started writing music, as in written down music, at that time, and I had my choir teacher, choir master at St Oswald's, was also a good composer and harmony teacher, and he got me started writing choral music. And I went away after A level to do a degree, music degree, classical music at Bristol University. Now, what was good about that? I mean, it was a great course in terms of the rigor of it, but Bristol was, particularly at that time, a very much a jazz city. There was loads and loads of jazz playing, and I got to really cut my teeth playing in all sorts of situations, where people would call you and say, "Can you come and play tonight?" And you'd go, and you would never have rehearsed, and you would never have seen the charts before, and you would just play. And that sort of lies at the heart of being a jazz musician, um, improvising and adapting to things as you go on. So alongside my classical music that I was doing as a degree, I also had a great playing experience as well.
So that's interesting. So then when you graduated, did you then go into a career in what? In playing, in composing? What was the next move?
Yeah, well, I was, like most people, I was sort of a bit lost. By the time I finished my music degree, I did a master's degree in composition as well at Bristol, and by then, I was pretty focused. I mean, I'd always been focused on being a composer. I mean, it feels mad now, but basically I was just hell bent on being a composer without really knowing how to achieve that. And I actually went back to live in County Durham and lived there for a while, and started doing teaching work and lots of playing as well, up there, jazz playing, and gradually started to build my, I mean, I had a big portfolio because I'd written a lot of music already and I had pieces performed at Bristol, but trying to sort of broaden my reach. And actually, as a link to Mass in Blue, there was a work I'd written at Bristol called Midwinter. It was a work for choir and orchestra. And I'd sent out recordings of this piece. And a guy called David Temple, who conducts Hertfordshire Chorus and Crouch End Festival Chorus, got in touch and commissioned a work. It wasn't the Mass in Blue, it was a different work. But that commissioning relationship with David led on some years later to the commissioning of Mass in Blue.
So I was going to ask you next, where did the idea for the Mass in Blue come from? Bearing in mind it wasn't called the Mass in Blue straight away. I mean, what were you setting out to do?
Well, David Temple, who I just mentioned previously, came to me and he said would I consider setting the Mass in Latin for jazz orchestra and choir. And the reason why he asked that was that he had recently commissioned another work by a composer called Roland Perrin, which was a song cycle, a setting of poetry for the choir. And he was looking for a companion piece. So something that could make a full concert with a jazz ensemble. So Roland's piece was for small big band and choir. And in fact, the scoring of Mass in Blue in its full version owes itself to the fact that Roland's scoring was that slightly reduced big band. And so David suggested it, and I was really interested because it kind of was the perfect commission at the perfect time. Before I wrote Mass in Blue, I think there was a tendency for me to either be in classical choral mode or jazz mode, and sort of keeping those two strands separate, partly because sometimes people from one group don't trust the other. I mean, that's the slightly blunt way of saying it. But in this piece, it was an opportunity for me to really smash together all these energies that are me. So you've got the choral music, the gospel sounds, the blues sounds and the improvising, all of that thing. So, David was inspired really to ask me. No, I was delighted.
And what was the first performance like? I mean, I think was it 2003 it was first performed, or maybe that's when you wrote it, but what was it like?
2003. Well, 2003, it was at the Cambridge Corn Exchange, with Hertfordshire Chorus, who were the commissioners, and had a very low audience turnout, which was no one's fault really, because it was one of those weekends in Cambridge where there were a million concerts, but it was pretty sparse in the room, and we performed it. And shortly before the performance, I said to a good friend of mine who came, I said, I am absolutely certain, I said, no one is ever going to do this piece again. I said, guaranteed. And, I've been completely wrong about that, and how happy I am that I was wrong. And just briefly, I would say that I've reflected on that a lot in the time in between. And I think the reason it's been successful is it's a very honest work for me, about me. It's all things that I really, they were there with me from the start of the musical journey. So there's the choral music, the liturgical text, which I know very well, and I've sung it in many, many settings, in Latin, in English, and the blues playing, and that kind of throwing caution to the wind thing that happens in a jazz context. all of that lives in Mass in Blue. And maybe a bit like, you know, people sometimes say that the breakthrough novel for someone is really the piece that's about themselves. I think Mass in Blue is about myself in a good way. And I think that's why it's strong and it's endured.
I love what you say about throwing caution to the winds, because of course, you know, as a choir, as a choral singer, that's what you have to do with a piece like that. You can't be too cautious about it, can you? You've got to kind of just let yourself go and go with it.
You absolutely do. And I've said many times to choirs, particularly, you know, in the latter stages or on the day when we're rehearsing together, I say, you know, the time for learning all the details has gone. It's over now. So if you're struggling with the et expecto, resurrect with the exact words, make some words up, but don't be on the back foot. You know, really perform it. I think audiences always want their choirs to be full of energy, but particularly with a piece like this, they don't want the choir to be sort of hanging back in their copies. So that's my message to the choir, and I'll reiterate on the day. You know, get out of the copies, look at Richard, and it'll all come together. Your energy will bring it together.
Brilliant. I love it. Just briefly, why did it move from being Jazz Mass to Mass in Blue?
Well, it was called Jazz Mass, and David Temple, the commissioner, suggested after we'd performed it, and we were due to do another performance in Durham Cathedral with Hertfordshire Chorus the next year, and he said, "Would you consider changing it to Mass in Blue?" And you know, a nod to Rhapsody in Blue and those things. And I must confess, I initially thought, "Oh, it's a bit, you know, corny. That's a bit sort of hackneyed," but I think he was spot on, because the name tells you about what the piece is. And you know, it is the right title, and so again, huge thanks to him for sort of suggesting that, you know, having that. I think there's a problem with composers who are often very sort of humble or sort of uncertain about our pieces. So the idea of sort of calling it a name that alludes to a composer like George Gershwin, immediately you think, no, I'm not going to do that. So the fact that that energy came from David helped me sort of make that leap, if you like.
Well, it's a terrific leap and a brilliant move, I would say. The other interesting thing about it, of course, is, I mean, obviously it became phenomenally successful, and it's been performed all over the world. I mean, it's not just in this country. And I wonder, over the years, have you sort of encountered any, I don't know, sort of not resistance, but any sort of slight sort of raising of the eyebrows about the fact that you've got a sacred text that is set to jazz music?
Yeah, yes. I mean, in the early years of working on the piece, and you know, it wasn't really very well known at all. I got a few sort of tickings off. I remember being in Leicester at a performance, and someone in the audience sort of complaining that they thought it was very inappropriate that you know, because it's very sort of, it's quite earthy music, isn't it? It's kind of sexy and earthy, but in a good way. As the work's got better known and gets done more often, I never hear that. I tend to hear, oh, how enjoyable it's been. The thing I probably most often hear now is there'll always be someone in a choir, and I bet you there'll be someone in Waverley Singers when we do it, who'll say to me afterwards, you know, when we started rehearsing this, I really wasn't sure, but now I've really got into it. Because for some people, I think there is a sort of stylistic hurdle they've got to get over. And also, as you know, because you've been working on it, some of the actual rhythms, when you look at them on the page, are a bit scary. Thinking particularly of the Gloria. Now, once you know those rhythms orally, they're not hard, are they? Once you know them. So I think that there's sometimes with Mass in Blue, there's a sort of difficult bit in the rehearsal process at the beginning. But once the music starts to flow, and particularly when you add the ensemble and you get that energy underneath the choir, that seems to really lift people and they feel they can fly with it.
There's a management trope about, groups, management teams coming together, and you're forming, you're storming, you're norming, and then you're performing. And I think that's a very good.
Yes, it would be for this piece, definitely. Yes, and at the end, it's all about the performance, and the details are far less important.
But I must say, I was listening the other day. I was actually trying to sort of follow the rehearsal aids for the Benedictus, which as a bass is just absolutely glorious. And when you get to the Hosanna, I had this sort of flash, and I thought, you know what? When Jesus was was riding on the donkey into Jerusalem, I bet the crowd sounded more like Will Todd than J.S. Bach. I mean, it's authentic in that sense, actually, isn't it? This kind of, as you say, very earthy music. I mean, that's really what it's all about. We've become much more refined in the way we approach these things, but it's very basic and elemental.
It is elemental and interesting. That's an interesting point you make, because I mean, there's a huge spectrum of mass settings, aren't they? And there's some amazing music in all the genres. But in my piece, you're right. It is elemental. It's energetic. It's sort of almost it's very human, isn't it? And when I was first working on it, I initially got a bit bogged down, not exactly hiding the obvious, but sort of not feeling I could go with the flow of these big blues things. And then as I worked through it, I just thought, why? Why would I not have a big, massive blues at the start of the credo and then a fast swing? And why would I not have a big funky Hosanna there? Because that's what the music wants to be. It doesn't want to be almost that, but not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think once I'd sort of said to myself, you're allowed to be absolutely heart on the sleeve, no holds barred, big moments, big rhythmic things. It came to life then because I allowed it to be itself. If you think of the end of the credo, with those big key changes, that's a very bold thing to do, because it's very sort of it's sort of crass almost, but I don't think it is crass. It's just it celebrates this moment with incredible energy.
And then you've also, of course, you've got the other slightly unusual thing is you've got the reprise of the credo at the very end of the piece.
Yes, well, that was because, as you know, the 6 movements, the final movement is the Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God, and it's a beautiful text, and the tendency is to set that music sort of slow and beautifully, and it presents a problem in a concert work, not in liturgy, but in a concert work of, is this the right note to end this on? Now, in some mass settings, it would be perfect, and it would be a sort of reflective piece. Other composers, I'm thinking Haydn Nelson Mass, for example, repeats the Hosanna that from the Sanctus at the end, sort of brings it back. But I just thought that music at the end of the credo is so massive and energetic that it had to return at the end, and so it feels very natural now.
Well, it certainly feels very, very powerful when you sing it, I have to say.
Yes. And it needs to be that, because you need to come back to that energy, I think, at the end.
So if you were talking to some of those maybe skeptical people who
the doubters,
the people who are not used to this genre, You know, what would you say to what's your favorite thing about the Massive Blue? Not just as the person who wrote it, but as you said before, as the person who has performed it many, many times and gets a real kick out of doing it every single time you do it still.
Well, I think it's quite simply that it has so much energy and so many different shades within it. You know, from the very sort of reflective soprano solo at the start of the Agnus Dei, and the gentle Sanctus melody at the beginning there, through to this massive sort of big band jazz music that you hear in the Creed and in the Gloria. And because of that, because of the contours of the piece, I think it's very gripping to watch it, to listen to it, and definitely to perform it. And that's, you know, that's why I still really enjoy doing performances, because it's energetic. I mean, I never consider when I'm playing it, I never really consider that I've written this. I just feel like it's a thing that we're all doing together, you know. And I mean, this might surprise you, but there's always a little moment towards the end when I'm sort of almost surprised to realise, oh, actually, I think this is quite good. I mean, I never, it's sort of, I think it's almost inbuilt in creatives to assume that your work is actually rubbish, but no one's actually worked that out yet, right? That's almost like standard. So even in a work like Mass in Blue that's been performed so often, I think there's a tiny little bit of me that sort of thinks, is this actually just a load of old rubbish? But then when we perform it and there's all that energy and we're all having so much fun and the soprano soloists going off and, you know, there's all this stuff, I'm reminded it's this energy that makes it, you know, powerful, and that's what I enjoy about performing it.
Terrific. Well, we are certainly looking forward to it, and I hope we do justice to the work. I'm sure we will, but it's
no doubt. I have no doubt you will. Because if you get your energy right, the work will come off.
Great. And of course, although we spent our time talking about the Mass in Blue, you're also going to be performing a jazz set with the Will Todd Jazz Ensemble, and I think you're also going to be accompanying us on piano when we do Bob Chilcott's Little Jazz Mass as well. So there's going to be a lot to enjoy in this concert.
Oh, it's going to be lots of fun. I love playing Bob's Little Jazz Mass. It's a really nice piece, and yeah, and doing a bit of free playing. I think it's going to be the start of the second half. We'll do a few numbers there to sort of to make that gap, sort of get us prepared for the Mass in Blue, I think.
Terrific. Will, thank you ever so much for sparing the time. It's been a real joy talking to you. Look forward to seeing you when you come to take our rehearsal on the 22nd of February, and then again on the 24th of March for the concert.
It's going to be fabulous.